that automation-focused IT professionals across the globe say about state of IT automation in 2024. The State of IT Automation Report was developed in a partnership with Censuswide. This research identifies the latest trends, best practices, and benchmarks for automation and orchestration across cloud, data and machine learning pipelines, IT operations, self-service enablement, and more. In today's session, Stonebranch's Chief Technology Officer, Peter Baljet, and Chief Marketing Officer, Scott Davis, will review the key insights and trends identified in the 2024 report, discuss implications for the state of IT automation industry, and share practical advice for tomorrow's IT leaders and professionals. During this session, we won't have time for a live Q&A, but if you have any questions, please submit them at the end of the session and we will follow up. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Scott, over to you.
Welcome everybody to this session. I have to say, this is one of my favorite sessions each year, and that's going back 3 years now, including this one. So this annual report started just 3 years ago, but now we're starting to see trend data as it works into the report. What we're going to do today is Peter and I are going to go through the presentation. We're going to talk through our findings. But before we dive into that, let's go ahead and take a look at just how we built the presentation, where the research was done, who we got survey data from. And so let's start here, the demographic and methodology. Basically, we targeted companies that were over 500 employees, but all the way up to large enterprise. We also went after and used a third-party market research firm out of the UK called Censuswide. So this is all they do all day, every day. It's third-party validated. Obviously, it's not just a vendor report. And we use this research on our own to decide where we go ahead and develop the product each year. So we want to share that with everybody on the call today. And I'll note that there were 408 participants in the survey. They came from all over the place globally. So the largest area was North America, of course, to represent the region that I sit in, obviously. But then we have 25% in EMEA, 25% in APAC, and 13% in South America. So it's a really nice global split. It's also very statistically relevant across all of the different regions and all of the different company sizes. So it's very solid in terms of the data that is inside of the presentation here. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Peter. Peter, why don't you talk us through just the first emerging trends and then some of the evolving trends that we're seeing?
Yeah, Scott, it's nice to be here with you for the third year in a row also. So glad we could doing this on a year-over-year basis, because one of the key things is, we see two types of trends. There's, this is the automation space is going through a tremendous amount of innovation and growth over the past couple of years. And so we look at two different areas. One is the emerging trends. So what things do we see that are new? What are new things that companies are doing? But then also the evolving trends, meaning, hey, we see them year over year. We're trying to watch what the growth and focus is and what the changes are. So that's how, as we go through this data, we're going to be looking at both sides of those two things. But yeah, the first thing is just hybrid IT. I think we're seeing a lot of companies now realizing that they've got a lot of things on-prem. They also have a lot of things they've been growing in the cloud. And now we're seeing that needs to be integrated and automated, just like it used to be in the on-prem world. Now we're seeing that we have to do that in this hybrid IT landscape. Also, speed and sustainable scalability. So, once you start to grow the footprint of your automation, it can get to be unwieldy, meaning a lot of different tools out there, a lot of different groups doing different things. And it's getting it back to being kind of an enterprise competency where you can manage it just like you do mission critical systems. And then, the other emerging trend is machine learning pipelines. We had seen this in the past as a growing area, but a lot of focus on this, especially with all of the Gen AI things that we're seeing companies do. So pipelines and machine learning pipelines are becoming very important. And then on the evolving trend, we're
This
going to
was
go
an
through
ad, right, Peter? We added this to the presentation, to the survey this
Mhm.
year, some details on machine learning pipelines, specifically because of generative AI. So
That's right.
there's some new data in here that is pretty cool.
And then I think, Scott, we'll go through the evolving trends. I think that really is that first set of data that we're going to
Okay,
take a look
yeah,
at.
let's dive in. So we're going to start off with IT automation, just some of the main key points around the core of the survey. So Peter, when I look at this, the question here was really what percentage of the audience is using a cloud-only environment, an on-prem only environment, and a hybrid IT environment. And there's kind of something big that emerged this year. Every year for the last 2 years, I said the last 2 years, really it was pretty split between cloud, on-prem, and hybrid. This year was the first year where hybrid really took over. And we have some thoughts on why that is. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly hybrid IT is probably being used by most organizations, some mix of it. So Peter, why don't you share what we were talking about yesterday relative to
Yeah.
why it's really peaked or spiked this year?
Yeah, I think when we first looked at this data, we felt like, hey, this seems like there's a big jump, probably a bigger jump than you would ordinarily see. And what we talked about was the term hybrid IT. I think is becoming a word that people use to describe, hey, we're doing both cloud and our legacy on-prem, SaaS systems. And that, I think that term and that trend of people also within companies realizing, hey, we are hybrid IT. Our footprint has grown big enough where we're doing things in all three places. And so we are a hybrid IT landscape. I think they probably were like that before, but now it kind of becomes where people are I'm seeing it as just an everyday thing that they do.
They're starting to
and the other
identify
thing-
with it, right? It was a term
Mhm.
that oftentimes was confused with hybrid cloud, hybrid IT. I mean, I 5 years ago when I got here, hybrid IT was not used as much as
Yeah.
it is today. So I think people are thinking of their
Right.
environments as hybrid IT. And also, I think the individuals within the teams are now saying, okay, I'm not just working on cloud anymore. I'm not just working on prem like maybe I was 2 or 3 years ago. Now I'm working in both. So I identify as hybrid IT, right, with the landscape. All right, so that takes us actually nicely into the next question, which was, which IT environments are you automating in 2024? And when I look at this, what I see is a good mix, obviously across the board of everything, but I also see an awful lot of people still automating on premises, whether it's mainframe or servers in the data center, or even private cloud. I mean, all the buzz is around cloud, and for sure you'll see data as we go further in here around cloud. But Peter,
Mhm.
what's going on here? Why are we seeing so much on-prem?
I think it's, there's still a good amount of companies that have an on-prem footprint. I think some of the data that we see shows that, only 20 to 30% of workloads have been moving to the cloud. And so, that's still the realization that, hey, now that we've got a bigger cloud footprint, we need to integrate our legacy systems into the cloud. Specifically with containers, we've actually been talking to customers where they know that in the future they want to move workloads around, and they're looking at the container technology that if they can package their applications in containers, it becomes easier to move those around because container technology is pretty standard across on-prem and on cloud. A lot of people are using Kubernetes, OpenShift, and other systems to manage and execute, containers. So we expect that to grow as customers look at trying to move workloads around.
Yeah, for sure. And there's little fine print at the bottom of this slide that says, we get that containers are not traditional IT environment like the rest of these things, right? But it fits in this question really nicely because it is something that's used very similarly to the rest of these things or within them, right?
Right.
So, there's a point that's made on this slide that, hey, evidence is clear. Your automation solution must orchestrate everywhere and connect everything. So when we're talking automation solutions, we'll get into that in just a moment, but there's a lot of different automation solutions that automate each one of these environments. And that's sort of historically how people have gone to market. And so let's dive into what those automation solutions are. in just a moment. Before we get there, let's say, hey, everybody that was asked of your planned growth and adoption of automation technologies in 2024, where are you actually growing? What are you actually doing? And Peter, 86% of the respondents plan to grow their automation programs. Can you give us some context around how they fit into each one of these buckets right here? There was some of them are enterprise-wide, some of them are at the team level.
Yeah.
What's the difference and why is that happening?
This is, Scott, when we see a lot of automation takes a lot of different forms, and there's a lot of different tools out there. And what we see is that, usually some automation will start at a team or group level, and, they'll use a certain tool, or they'll use what we call kind of some scripting or glue code. But as that gets bigger and bigger, all this automation is becoming more and more kind of a business critical process that they have to manage. And so it'll grow into more of a kind of maybe centralized, maybe common, way to do automation. And so that's why you see these different investments, and it kind of leans towards the enterprise grade, because that's what you're going to see is that, hey, we have a lot of systems out, and this kind of goes back the way IT kind of evolves and matures over time, that it's like, hey, we've got a lot of things out there. We need to kind of get more cost control, more common way of doing things. And so it kind of leans more towards the enterprise side. Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things I see in here is, listen, everybody's automating, right? It's your point of start. And you may be starting as an individual, you may be starting at the department level, but there is for sure a shift towards this enterprise centralization and orchestration that we'll talk more about as we get into this. Speaking of which, there's a lot of different types of automation out there that requires orchestration at some level. But if you look at it from what people are investing in today, we asked the question, what are your top automation technologies that you want to invest in? What are your priorities for 2024? And there's a few things that jump out here. I'll talk about a few, and Peter will talk about a few. The very first is cloud automation continues to be number one. And cloud automation as a priority has been there all 3 years of this research. It's been at the top. Now, the big change in the survey this year is the change in business process automation and workload automation. So these are different because they grew so much. They're the only two on the list that have double-digit growth, business process automation having the most growth and workload automation having the second most growth, but they're really two sides of the same coin. Peter, you and I talked about this a lot. A lot of this comes back to this idea of digital transformation, right? Going into the cloud, transforming your business, and business process automation and workload automation are kind of like two sides of the same coin. Business process automation works on, as the term implies, business processes, and workload works on IT processes or tasks, right? What else are you seeing here? What are you thinking about the BPA and WLA? What's driving that?
Yeah, I think, Scott, what's interesting is, the cloud automation has been there, and we've seen a lot of the innovation in cloud automation be driven back to the on-prem world. And as we talked about earlier, hey, we've got all of this automation in the cloud. It's got to get integrated back into our legacy business processes, our maybe legacy workload automation tools. And so now that it's kind of like, okay, now we have to focus on those to almost catch up or to integrate over into the cloud. And so that's, I think, why we're seeing these bump up, is because of the focus of, hey, it's kind of those two things. One is, hey, we can drive a lot of this stuff we've learned in the cloud back into our legacy systems and IT landscape, but then also we have to integrate and automate across into the cloud as well.
I think it's that across piece, right, that's driving the business process automation and the workload automation. So these are two technologies that connect the dots between all these other technologies. Yeah. And we're going to get really into detail on that over the next couple slides. One of the things that we want to call out is that workload automation and service orchestration are kind of synonymous today. So a little history on SOAP, or service orchestration automation platforms. It was a term that was coined by Gartner in 2020. And it was brand new at that point, but Gartner very clearly called out that SOAP is an evolution from workload automation. So depending on where you started in your journey, if you had been using the term workload automation for years, it's likely that you're still calling it workload automation because SOAP is so new, you haven't gotten into it. But there's a large percentage of people, 35, that are starting to call it SOAP. And so what I think you can read into here is that regardless of what you call it, people are searching for these technologies for the same reason, which is the capabilities that SOAP offers. And let's talk a little bit about SOAP. Peter, I'm going to turn this over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the, what workload automation was and now what SOAP is over the next couple slides?
Yeah, I think the kind of what we wanted to show here was workload automation has a long history. Systems have always been needed to be orchestrated or automated, across, because where you have all these different systems, whether they're different enterprise systems like HR, ERP, supply chain management, whether they're systems in a bunch of facilities that you have, whether they're stores or manufacturing, that they all needed to be automated. And we typically call that workload automation. But, over the last, 10 to 15 years, we've seen new categories of automation pop up. Here, I think, DevOps, with a lot of the improvements and innovation we've seen in software development has driven DevOps, especially with a lot of the agile practices. The data, something that we'll talk about, and that's something that's probably the most new. And the cloud has really opened that up because it's so easy and scalable to do data analytics and data capabilities in the cloud, a lot easier than it was able to do in the IT landscape. And then you've got, obviously cloud automation, which we've talked about. But these typically have been very siloed, and because they were all started within the functional areas. But now that they've kind of become first-class citizens, just like workload automation, now they all need to work together because they're not really, standalone. And that's kind of what we call the past.
And I think the big takeaway here is each one of these have a bunch of different tools within the categories, right? Workload automation has a bunch of different types. I mean, you have job schedulers, open source schedulers, cloud schedulers, blah, blah, blah. But historically, workload automation was really just focused on-prem in the data center or on the mainframe. Right. And then you had cloud automation that started up, infrastructure, so on and so forth, right? So there's a bunch of different tools. They're all in silos in the past. And if I flip to the next slide, that changes an awful lot. So Peter, why don't you talk us through that change?
Yeah, and I think, Scott, one more comment on the workload automation from a past perspective is it wasn't as heterogeneous as it is today. It was really, you had a limited set of type of operating systems, things that you ran on. Now it's obviously, there's a lot more heterogeneous when you look at all of the SaaS and cloud technologies that are out there. But if you look at where we see it today, again, all of these different areas now don't really operate by themselves. They need to be integrated across because there's processes that really go across those. For instance, when you look at data ops, the data that comes into maybe a data pipeline or that you need to kind of get into your data ops may come from an enterprise system that may have to generate it. So that has to be triggered on the enterprise system. It has to export the data. That's got to be moved over to where the data ops actually happens. When you look at cloud automation, that may bleed over into the DevOps, where DevOps is trying to spin up some test environments, some development environments. And so that may happen based on an ITSM request that may come from an enterprise system. So all of these things really have some, very specific things they're doing in their areas, but yet they're part of an overall business process. And that's where you see what we call SOAP, service orchestration and automation platforms, are evolving into, which is, hey, we're still going to play this kind of backbone and provide a way to integrate across all these different areas.
It's really service orchestration and automation, as the name implies. It is orchestrating more than just workload. Workload is part and the core of a SOAP, right? It's where it was born from workload automation. SOAP was born from workload automation, but now it's grown into these other silos of automation, and it's capable of maybe replacing some of it, but more likely orchestrating the automation that's in these other tools, right? That's how we see it playing out. And there's no clearer picture than this. So Peter, why don't you talk us through this? I think start with maybe RPA and business process automation and how it's different from these other categories on the right.
Yeah, it's funny. We get that question a lot about what the differences are. And I think we've kind of put this together to kind of help explain it, which is if you go back to the first slide, we had cloud automation at the top, and then BPA, and then workload automation. This kind of explains where BPA fits and where workload automation fits, which is BPA is really up in the system level and also has maybe people involved in it. Workload automation typically work down in the system to system level, but between IT systems. Now, what's interesting about this picture is you can see it overlays some of the different areas that we just talked about: data ops, cloud automation, DevOps. And what you see in each of these boxes are tens and tens, and even some of them hundreds of different tools that you can use. This is especially true in the data ops world, where you have a lot of different data ops tools depending on what area you're talking about. However, all of these tools need to be integrated and coordinated, orchestration, the word that we use. And typically, workload automation SOAP tools are really supposed to be single tools. So they're supposed to be a single tool because they tend to reach across all these different areas and help integrate them, so that you've got kind of, again, a platform and a backplane which everything plugs into. Or they can go deep. These tools do have the ability to do the automation themselves. It's kind of a best of breed versus just a common tool to do something. That's one of the key decision factors that we see companies making.
Peter, I think this requires an example, right? Maybe, I think one of the ones we talked about yesterday was in infrastructure automation. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between something that is like a pure play, maybe you're using a Terraform or a Puppet or Chef together, versus using a SOAP directly to spin up infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that's a good example, Scott, where people use Terraform to one of the reasons they use it is because it's a very common open source tool that you can use across cloud providers in terms of spinning up cloud services. But that needs to be integrated in maybe with an ITSM process where somebody submits a ticket that that needs to get transferred into something that's going to call Terraform and execute that cloud provisioning. The other thing, though, is that we see that if it's a simple use case where, hey, it's like, hey, I don't need to do Terraform because all I'm doing is spinning up a simple instance or providing a cloud bucket. The SOAP tools can do that directly because at the end of the day, they're both operating on the same APIs. It gets down to one, whether there's a sophistication where you want to use like a Terraform, or do you want to eliminate another layer and just use a SOAP tool to actually do it? So that's the kind of differences we see in terms of the decisions that need to be made.
But in both cases, SOAP is involved, right? So a SOAP would come in and it would trigger Terraform and the automation that happens there. And if it's complex and it has, you're spinning up cloud instances, installing databases, and all the different things that Terraform will do, it makes sense to keep using Terraform. You're just going to trigger it from the centralized plane of SOAP. Yeah. Now, if you don't want that, you just eliminate it and go direct from a SOAP to connect to AWS and spin up, a bucket or whatever.
And Scott, the other thing that it provides is while you're running the automation, typically these things, may be running on the weekend if you're talking about spinning up services or infrastructure to run jobs, and then spin it down. But it provides a common way to know when something goes wrong and can notify people. So in other words, when you talk about that enterprise capability across your automation, this provides a common way for IT people to get notified, take action, maybe be more proactive when things are taking a longer time than they thought. So it provides a common way to do that versus if you think about if you did, so what happens if you don't have a SOAP? Well, I've got to know every single tool that people are using, and I have to be able to get notifications differently from every tool.
Across
so this, again,
all these
gets into
categories, right? There's nothing
Mhm.
centralized. You have different. So
Right.
I think the headline here is SOAP doesn't necessarily replace these adjacent technologies. It fits on top of them as an orchestration layer, but it
Right.
gives you that centralized place to orchestrate them. The
Yep.
infrastructure examples are, hey, you can bypass in some instances best of breed, but typically you don't. You know, there's going to be more cases where you're interconnecting these tools than just running this in a silo. Okay, good. Thank you. Now, next question, applications automated by SOAP or workload automation in 2024. We asked this question basically to find out, hey, where are people spending their time? Now, we asked a similar question earlier on, not just related to SOAP or WLA. Where are you automating? Which infrastructures? Remember, and you had mainframe and cloud and everything else.
Yeah.
This gets more down to the application layer. What are you actually automating? And this turned out interesting. Peter, what are your first observations of the data here?
Yeah, I think this just shows those first four are pretty even, and I think what you're seeing is that there's automation going on everywhere. Everywhere is looking at, hey, how do we automate these processes? And so it's not just one area; it's across everything. And again, this kind of gets into the maturity aspect of being able to eliminate a lot of manual effort that might be going on. So when teams first start out, they may be doing some glue code scripts, but then when you kind of make it mission critical, you've got to kind of bring it to a more enterprise grade tool. And I think that's why you see really across everything this happening.
The business applications and data pipeline applications grew an awful lot. So, whether it's SaaS-based like Salesforce or Workday or whatever, right? Or on-premise applications like your traditional SAP, ERP, or Oracle, big bump here. And I said just a few minutes ago that BPA, business process automation, automates the business applications. What's the difference here between what that tool does and what SOAP does for these solutions?
BPA is again more at the business process level. So
person
could
to
involve
person,
people,
right? This is people communicating. Person A does this, triggers something that goes over to person B to do something next. It's a series of steps.
Yeah,
it's a workflow, but different in terms of what it automates. Yeah. These applications, while they're business applications, they're still automated in the back end with workload automation and SOAP, right?
Yeah. And Scott, just one more point on this. I think we also see this being driven by the need now that we're in a much more hybrid IT landscape to integrate in all of the systems that we have, whether they be on-prem. So that's kind of having a renewed focus on the on-prem, especially on the on-premise business applications.
Yeah, connecting that hybrid IT environment right across all these different applications within the environments that are on-prem and cloud. All right, so as people are automating all these things, clearly there has to be change, right? And so we asked the question, do you plan to replace workload automation technologies in 2024? And a whopping 82% of people said, yes, we plan to replace or add. But there is difference between replace and add. Peter, 27%, about a quarter of the people respondents said, I plan to replace, but 55% said, I want to add. What's the difference here, and why would you do one or the other?
Yeah, the one thing I think we realize is that automation is not new. There's a lot of existing workload automation tools that are in place today that are mission critical. And these tools, once you get them well ingrained to automate all of your systems, they're hard to take out. And so what we're seeing is companies maybe start with a SOAP type tool and you have a lot of existing automation that you can start to plug in, or if you want to reduce your tool set, maybe you rebuild automation in a SOAP tool. But also you can take a phased approach of all of your legacy automation, meaning over time you can kind of say, okay, we're going to replace that and get it into our SOAP tool. So I think when you look at this 55%, that's a little bit of what's happening there, is kind of saying we don't got to do everything all at once. We can kind of take a phased approach to it.
Yeah. So there's I want to replace everything all at once, 27%. And, neither are bad. We see people do both all the time, right? Within our install base, within our prospects, our customers. It really comes down to your strategy. And there's some concern about converting old jobs to a new platform. But once people get into it, they realize it's not as bad as maybe it sounds. So within those people who said, yes, I'm going to make a change, we decided to go in and ask why, right? And so last year, it was pretty split, 50%, 48%, not real difference between these three categories of I need more functionality, I need better customer service, or I need to reduce cost. This year, there was a spike, though. We saw a lot more people say, hey, I actually need more functionality, which candidly is what we expected to see last year, right? But now I think it's becoming even a bigger thing. And so within that 67%, we went down and we asked the next obvious question: which capabilities do you want to actually see in your next tool? And the thing that shows up right at the top is self-service. And we have a whole section on self-service we'll get to in a few minutes, but this is the biggest thing that people are looking for. They're trying to democratize automation across their entire ecosystem of end users. And again, we'll get into that more, but maybe, outside of the idea that user interface, and there's a lot of old legacy workload automation tools out there, they want to make it look nicer. I think the place to focus here is on SaaS, SaaS deployed workload automation. And this was the fastest growing category at 14%, and it bumped up 4 spots year over year. Peter, what's the driver here behind SaaS? Why now? Like, SaaS has been around for a long time. Why in workload automation is it suddenly becoming a thing?
Yeah, historically, workload automations was always on-prem because of the number of systems that it had to get integrated into. I think we're seeing 2 things here. One is things are in both places. They're in the cloud, they're on-prem, and they're also in SaaS. But so you've got to integrate all. So it really doesn't matter where it sits. But having customers put a system like a SOAP system or workload automation system in the cloud, I think is just a maturity where companies are very comfortable hosting things in these major cloud providers where redundancy, scalability, and the connection back to their different data centers or to their SaaS providers has gotten very reliable. They've gotten used to this with their existing SaaS systems that are always there, always up. And so we see them run these systems that do heavy volumes of automation transactions and run them successfully in the cloud with very little or no downtime every year. So I think that's just a maturity of getting comfortable with SaaS and its reliability.
So comfort is a big deal. The other thing I can comment on here to add to this is I've talked to a lot of our customers, a lot of the analysts on a regular basis, and there's just a cloud-first approach that a lot of companies are taking, and they don't want to install stuff on-prem. So there's a desire to implement in a SaaS environment. Now, that's not every company. Some people are saying, hey, I only want to still implement on-prem, but obviously it's enough here to make this category bump up a good bit.
Right.
Okay, let's go on to the next question, which goes back to self-service. So we talked a lot about self-service just a moment ago. One of the things that we asked 3 years ago when we first started this was this same question. So how many end users do you have using automation from a self-service standpoint? And we capped it at 200, thinking that the highest level that any corporation could possibly get to was 200. Well, this looked like a hockey stick curve, right? You had about the same percent in 50, about the same percent in 50 through 100, and then it shot through the roof. So we realized we were wrong. We spoke with some more customers. We realized, oh, wow, people are using this across thousands of people, right, within their organization. So we expanded it last year, expanded it this year. And what you see, my observation of this is it's starting to shift right a little bit, right? It used to be more of a bell curve where there are a lot more people in the middle, the 200 to 400 to 500 sort of range. But now you see the largest category in the 900 to 1,000. And we've had customers jump on and talk about how they're going about empowering and using access controls and different end user interfaces to help developers and data pipeline and business users gain access to automation. So no surprise this is growing towards the larger end, right? Just jumping here to automation across those end user bases, there's a real observation here that 3 years ago, there was a heck of a lot fewer people using it in the data teams and the development teams. Not to say they weren't using automation, they were just automating, not using a service orchestration and automation or a workload automation tool. So, it gradually bumped up last year, and now you're up 3 times for data teams and 6 times for developers over just 3 years ago. Peter, what are your thoughts on this? Anything that is driving this trend beyond the obvious that more people want automation, right?
I think it's, just when you, I think it's simply that you've got a lot of automation out there, and when you have it, you have to figure out, how do we run it, right? How do we trigger it? And so you used to be where, hey, I've got to submit a request to run it, or I got to go contact a certain group to do it. And now that this becomes so prevalent in each of these different areas, they're saying, hey, let's give the users the ability to run something, right? And so that eliminates that activity from having to be done by a specialized team. It's like, hey, let's empower the end user to run it when they need to, versus having to go through some process. And so I think that's what you're seeing with this spiking up.
So budget pressure on IT, resource pressure on IT, and then a general desire for data developers, cloud teams to just do this faster, right?
Yeah, and I think it gets down to just the agility it provides. If I don't have to wait, a week, a day, a couple hours, because I need an environment spun up, that just makes the whole, just makes things faster. So I think that's a key part of it as well.
Connecting that agility to scalability, right? I think that was our second emerging trend on the first slide. All right. So it's got to be tough to empower everybody across all of these self-service businesses or self-service access points. How are companies doing that? Well, they've got centralized IT automation teams. And, what we've generally seen is the size of the teams hasn't changed dramatically. I mean, it might shift from 11 to 25 or 20 or 26 to 55, but it generally, this works in the same way, a bell curve, right? Each year we've seen sort of in this same pattern. But I think the makeup of these teams has changed, right? These teams used to be very data center focused, just on their own little, I say little, not little, that's totally the wrong word, focused on their own workload automation tools. Maybe it was the mainframe or some sort of application, but we see them growing a whole lot more to support these broader businesses. Peter, I know you have some thoughts on this around centers of excellence. Why don't you dive into that for a sec?
Yeah, I think this still emphasizes the importance of, as automation becomes a core competency that a company has, and something that's been done a lot, they want to kind of have a group that helps promote best practices. Try to really focus on limiting the number of tools that you have, and then so that's kind of going to be the trend, because what do we call it when we just let people build whatever they want to build? Is kind of like the Wild West. So this is kind of trying to sit there and say, hey, listen, we all know that cost efficiencies and common knowledge comes from trying to really have a few things that we do really well, a few tools that we try to use. And so that's what we see, still being a focus with this data.
Yeah. Gartner talks about platform ops as an emerging thing. We see it in the market from time to time. So this is standardization and best practices.
Classic. Scott, it's the classic is let's not have people reinvent the wheel. Let's kind of, help them.
Exactly. All right, good. So the final section here is around the kind of new stuff, right? The generative AI, machine learning pipelines. This particular question is not new. We asked this same question last year. We asked, hey, within your data pipeline, if you're working on data pipelines, which automation approaches are you using? And there's an interesting finding here, right? Last year, it was kind of even across all categories, whether it was scripts and integrations or enterprise-grade scheduling or data-specific job tools, job schedulers, or open source scheduling. This year, you saw some bigger growth points in scripts and custom integrations and enterprise-grade scheduling. Now, these things are at odds with each other, right? Because you have people who scripts are never going to go away, custom integrations never away, but it's really gone up a lot, right? And then you have the total opposite end of the spectrum that went up alongside it, maybe not as fast, but still fast, right? Up a lot, dwarfing the others. So what's the difference here? Why are we seeing both go up? At first glance, you're like, what? Why?
Scott, from what we see, talking to customers and industry analysts, there's, this is still a growth area, right? So this is not like a mature area and everything is. It's still growing. There's still a lot of new things being done. And so, when you don't have a tool to help you do what you do, or you need to do something fast, you use scripts, right? That's kind of like the quickest way to get something implemented. But as that footprint increases, you tend to see the problem of having a lot of these custom things built. And so then you try to, kind of go more and say, hey, we need an enterprise grade tool or a common tool to kind of do this with. And so you see that shift over time, when you get too much of that. A lot of these things are kind of code centric. And, if you don't have a good way to manage that, then it gets, can get unwieldy. You kind of maybe generate a lot of tribal knowledge or technical debt. And so these tools, whether it be enterprise grade, or some of the domain specific tools, they help try to solve that problem.
Yeah. The other piece here that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about is you get so ingrained in category one that you start spending all your time being an ops person. And a lot of developers or data people don't want to do that, right? So we suspect that as category one goes up, the integration and custom scripts, you're going to see a lot of more people flipping to the enterprise piece with time. Yeah. So, time will tell. Immature sort of place because the cloud has dramatically changed where you store data, how you move data, how you transform data, how you stream data, which you couldn't do years ago. So we'll see where this one takes us. Now, of course, you can't do a survey in 2024 without asking about generative AI. And we were curious. So we asked, hey, do you use data pipelines or machine learning pipelines to train your Gen AI models? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. I was surprised, to be honest. I thought this would be reversed. I thought there'd be a lot less sophistication in the use of pipelines. But clearly people are using pipelines, and maybe pipelines made up of scripts and custom integrations, but they're building data pipelines to train and use generative AI models. Now, of course, there were people that are not, and of the quarter of the audience that are not, most often cited was basically resource problems or problems with being able to pull it off, right, with the people that they have to deploy and manage it. Peter,
I think there's...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, a lot of this is companies kind of looking, everybody wants to know what they, how they can leverage Gen AI. So it's not surprising to some degree that it's 72%. I think they're taking a lot of the capabilities that are done in data pipelines and kind of kind
Yeah.
of using that to kind of help do this. But you're right, Scott. I mean, I think we see a lot of skill sets lacking, just because it's so new, that there people haven't been trained up or had the experience necessary.
We're all playing with it, right? I mean, I challenge to ask anybody on this call that hasn't popped open ChatGTP or something else. But the fact that they're actually building off their own data or data sets to train these models is really interesting to me. Now, we went a level deeper on this one because we wanted to better understand it. And it seems that the mid-sized businesses are the ones that are most likely to use machine learning pipelines to train these Gen AI models. And the reason really is that if you're a small enterprise, you have the tools, you don't have the expertise, right? And on the flip side, if you're a large enterprise, you have the expertise, you have the tools, but
Wait a second.
you have to cut through red tape, right? So there's the security, the governance that they have to deal with. It seems that the mid-sized enterprises are the most likely to adopt and take off with this.
Yeah.
Peter, why don't you take us through this one? I know you're very passionate about it.
Yeah. This is, just like all software applications, we're, it's the same thing in the automation world. It's not like this is something just specific to automation. Is really how is Gen AI going to have an impact on it? When we put this out there, we thought, people are coming back with wanting, to do error handling and, get help with things. But what we saw was that really it's more about building automation. And when you look at automation, it's a lot of it is code based. So there's a lot of code generation that can be done with Gen AI. But these automation platforms also have APIs. And so accessing the APIs, how do you execute it? We see that the integrations, that can be built relatively quickly by using Gen AI if it's got sufficient training data. So that's something that we see that we think people are going to leverage it for. And then also, as you get non-technical users, a lot of what we're doing is looking at, hey, how do we use Gen AI to make it easier for non-technical users to build automation? You've got to train it right and have the right capabilities, but it really can add a lot of speed to building automation, and then also kind of enable less. We get into self-service. We have seen some self-service be where they're actually maybe building building automation. But we think Gen AI is going to make that a lot more possible.
When I see this one, I agree with you that I thought error handling was going to be more in line with the others.
Yeah.
But I guess if I remind myself what the network world was like years ago, where they tried to have self-remediating networks, people don't trust it, right? Even if it works. And so I think we're still a trust relationship, lack of trust relationship that we have with generative AI, and maybe that's what we're seeing play out here.
Right.
But if it suddenly becomes super accurate, maybe that all changes. We'll have to see what time brings. Let's go to the recommendations. Basically, this is a summary of everything that we looked at and what we're saying. Hey, make sure if you're in that 82% that is going to make a change, going to add something or replace, these are the things you need to be thinking about. So Peter, why don't you talk us through each one of these?
Sure. I know we got some questions, so I'll go through them fairly quickly. Integrations, like we talked about earlier, the heterogeneous landscape now, you have all different technologies and systems you have to integrate with. So the integrations that you're provided with, but also the ability to build integrations yourself and to easily access more is one of the key things you want to make sure that your SOAP platform has. Self-service, we talked a lot about that. We see self-service portals. We see self-service being integrated in with other types of systems like ITSM systems. So it's not just one thing, it's multiple ways of doing self-service. And when you talk about a platform, that's the value of a platform, is that it has UIs, but it also has APIs that you can build on top of it. And we've seen customers support a lot of self-service use cases that way. Centralized management, again, as all of this automation becomes mission critical, you've got to have people that support it in the middle of the night, on the weekends. And so when you have all this automation running, it's still got to plug up into some common backbone that can be managed efficiently and problems resolved quickly. Scalability, your footprint's only going to get bigger. So you want to make sure that you can scale up. There's people we see running millions and millions of automation flows each month. So you got to make sure that it scales appropriately. And then Gen AI strategy, this is evolving very fast, but you need to make sure that the tool you're using has sort of like a roadmap or a vision about how this is going to play in, because there are a lot of benefits when it is there, where it'll make things, building automations quicker and making it accessible to more types of users. So that's something that you want to make sure there's some sort of capability plan for that.
And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today. We're really happy that you took some time to learn about where the industry is going, and we're here if you have questions on the other end. All right.
Thank you, Scott and Peter, for your great insights on the state of IT automation. Later today, we will be sending you a recording from this session for you to rewatch or share. For those of you that submitted questions, please check your email later today, and we will send you our responses to your questions. Thank you so much for attending, and we hope that you have a great day.